Maxwell House, which is General Foods Kraft, a brand. So things radically changed. It just about doubled its market share. Another dramatic thing happened in this market, very, very unusual generally. 10 years later, the total market of instant coffee was only a third as big as it had been then. It absolutely decimated. And the reason, I believe, is that they were trying to cut prices and therefore making the product less good, and the competitors imitated this to be able to cut their prices, and so the taste was not so good, and people left instant coffee. This is in America, where instant coffee was never that big anyway. People drink much more ground coffee anyway. But that sort of dramatic change is not common, but it can happen, and it doesn't destroy what I'm saying, namely that during this 1 year that's analyzed here, the market was pretty steady. And you had these market shares, 90% down to 3% for the smallest of the top 8 brands, maximum. And how many people bought at least once in the year? Far more people bought Maxwell House, surprise, surprise, than bought Maxim. In other words, the big brand is big because lots of people buy it. That's not very surprising. But now let's look at the average purchase frequency, how often they buy per buyer. The 19% who bought Maxwell House, how often did they buy? The 3% who bought Maxim, how often did they buy Maxim in the year? And this comes back to my second question just now, is loyalty the same? Because how often you buy something is one of the many measures of loyalty. It implies repeat buying if you buy more than once. An average of 3.6 means that you bought it once, and you 2.5 times on average, you bought it again, to give you an average of 3.6. Now all these measures are pretty much the same. They're all about 3. Compared with this 6-fold variation in market shares, or 4-fold in penetration. So you can say sales depend on how many people buy times how often they buy, and sales of any one brand depend how many people buy, 24% to 6%, times 3. And you're pretty close. Whether sometimes there's 3.6 or 3.2 or 2.8. About 3 to a first approximation. I'm not ignoring the variation, but I'm saying in the first instance it's about 3. It's a remarkable pattern in that loyalty does not vary much from brand to brand. And this shows up in every product category that's been measured, not only for grocery products, but also for motor cars, for petrol, as I say, for something quite different like doctors' prescriptions of medical ethical drugs, antidepressants and things like that, heart drugs or whatever. The big brand and the little brand are bought by prescribed by very different numbers of doctors, but about as often for each brand, about as loyal. Happened in shorter time periods and longer time periods in other countries, and for different categories and so on. But there was variation about it. You know, it wasn't always free for coffee. It was between 2.5 and 3.5. But compared with market shares going from 30% to 1%, that was small. But then we found some patterns. We suddenly stumbled across the idea there was some regularities in this variation. And so we looked at that and found that it was the bigger brands who had higher purchase frequencies and the smaller brands had lower average purchase frequencies, 3.6 down to 2.6 in the example. Then we found 2 years or so after that that this had been discovered before by this guy McPhee at Columbia, not in a marketing context, quite different choice situations. And he'd called it objective. So we suddenly had a relationship with a whole range of other findings. And a theory, because McPhee explained it in the way that I've indicated. And then a bit later, we found a nice little formula which modeled that particular double jeopardy effect. It's very useful, it's so simple. Then another 5 or 10 years later, my colleagues and I sort of established a Dirichlet model that I talked about, which predicts an awful lot of things, including double jeopardy. And that was 20 years after it was first noted. The theory, the explanation came much later. Because one was facing phenomena which were regular and needed to be explained. All that sort of thing takes time. And perhaps the most practical final lesson, don't believe anything which has just been discovered. The only good results are old results, which have already been tested and explored and used. But in marketing or in anywhere else, in going to the moon and so on, one doesn't really want to be at the frontier of knowledge all the time. One wants to have well-established frontiers already, things which have already been tested and known. This doesn't mean to say people shouldn't be looking at new things. We do it. Other people do it, of course. But we shouldn't put too much weight on them when they're just new. But most new things don't last. Like most new brands in marketing fail. Thank you. Any questions?